Hello everyone, this is Yana Smakula. Welcome if you're new to my channel, or welcome back if you are a returning viewer. Today I have two cards to share with you featuring some products from Concord 9th designed by Kristina Werner. I'm a huge fan of Kristina's work. Her designs are absolutely inspiring, and whenever I see her products, I always want to rush to my craft room and create. So today I have cards with her Daisy Bouquet Stencils, and oh boy, these are so good. These remind me of my Yana's Daisy collection with Spellbinders. I have similar designs in that collection. Those are better press with the coordinating stencils, and also there is a die, a daisy die. So they sort of remind me of that, and I really like daisies. And when I saw this stencil set, I was like, yes, I have to give it a try. I have to create some daisy cards because I just like that. So today I'm creating daisy cards using these products. I'm also using an additional stamp set from an older release from Kristina Werner, and I'll show you that in a minute. And I'm using Concord 9th ink to do ink blending. The inks from Concord 9th are new to me. I have 6 of their colors. I believe this was one of their latest ink releases. These released a while back ago, but these are the only ink colors that I have, and I kind of wanted to stick to the products from one company, so I'm using those inks. And I also am sort of enjoying using a limited color palette lately. So this is what I'm doing. I'm sticking to a limited color palette, and I'm creating using just the 6 ink pads that I have from Concord 9th. For my very first card, I have a sheet of hammer mill cardstock. This is cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I have the very first stencil layer attached to a grip mat. So I have a grip mat from Waffle Flower. This is holding my paper. It is also holding my stencil, and I'm ink blending the background using 3 colors of ink. I have Plumberry for the bottom layer, I have Pimento for the top layer, and then Brickyard for the middle layer. So I have a little bit of a gradient happening here. Now, this stencil, the Daisy Bouquet Stencil set, there are 4 stencils, and the beautiful thing about these stencils, and probably one of the reasons why I was so drawn to this stencil set, is because you can color the background. And you guys know me, or maybe you don't know me, but I love to have colored backgrounds on my cards. I love to use colored cardstock for that reason. I love to use better press plates or, foil plates where I can color the entire background and have the design be as a negative like we have here. And I also love to use stencils where I can ink blend the entire background and then just add color to the design itself and make it pop or make it shine. So I really enjoy this stencil set. When you work with this particular stencil, and now I'm ink blending the layer with the leaves, but when you work with the very first layer, I would say it is best to use stencil adhesive. If you have it, there's like pixie spray or any other, removable adhesive. You can spray it on the back of your stencil and lightly adhere it onto your paper. If you have that, use that, because that makes ink blending an easier job, because your stencil is going to be attached firmly in place. The pieces of the stencil are not going to move. Everything is going to be nice and easy for you. But if you don't have that, you can still ink blend using the stencil. You just need to be kind of careful and probably hold the parts of the stencil in place down with your fingers when you do the ink blending. And you might not always be able to ink blend in a circular motion. You might have noticed that I was just blending going up and down, or just blending in one direction, so that I would not move these sections of the stencil when I was doing that. I still moved one section. You can see that there's this one little flower in the bottom right hand side corner, and that kind of shifted and moved a little bit, and I have a little bit of ink under that flower. So the edges of that flower are not very crisp, they're not very detailed. And that's because I did not use stencil adhesive and I did not pay close attention, and I wasn't being very careful when I was ink blending that particular section. Okay, with the ink blending done, I kind of blabber through the entire ink blending part, and I apologize. With the ink blending done, I used pistachio ink for the leaves. I also used star fruit. I wasn't sure of the name of that color. So star fruit ink for the flower centers. And I also created a sentiment. For the sentiment, I used a beautiful stamp set designed by Kristina. This is her mother's and father's stamps. And I stamped the Hope Your Day is Lovely sentiment using VersaFine Onyx Black ink onto the same Hammermill cardstock. I cut it out using the coordinating die. I also cut another blank die cut using that coordinating die, and I adhered the two die cuts together to create one sturdy piece. Now I wanted to add some splatter or spatter to this background. So I'm using the Spellbinders Spatter White product, and I'm just splattering a little bit of white, or maybe a lot of white, depends on how much white splatter you like on your card, onto my background. I'm using a water brush to do that, and whenever I actually have a dedicated water brush for that, and whenever I do this with a water brush, I also tend to splatter some water onto my background. So I have sort of like different effect splatter droplets on my background. Some are more watery, some are more opaque, and it just gives a nice variation, a nice finished look to the card. If you want to have just true white splatters, you might need to use a regular dry paintbrush and just use that to splatter the splatter white product. But if you don't mind the variation, using a water brush is a wonderful tool. I did trim my background to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches, and I foam mounted that onto an A2 top folding card base, a white card base. I added the sentiment using white foam adhesive squares, and I also added some aura sequins from Spellbinders. I scattered them around my daisies, and that finished this card. Now for card number 2, I kind of did something different. I started it off with a slightly different idea in mind, but my idea evolved as I was working on this card. Now, what I forgot to mention is that with this stencil, you can make both landscape and portrait cards. So you do have that option depending on how you orient your paper. And you can also kind of adapt this design to 5x7 card. It's not going to cover the entire 5x7 card background, but you can kind of make it a larger panel, have it, trim it a little bit down and still make it work for 5x7 cards. And you can see that on Kristina's YouTube channel, where she uses this stencil to make a 5x7 card. So here, to create a background, I'm using the Plum Berry ink. I'm doing all of my ink blending using the Spellbinders large fluffy brushes. I really love these particular brushes whenever I need to do a whole lot of ink blending quickly. They pick up a ton of ink and they transfer that ink in no time. Here you can actually see me being careful. With my right hand, I am left-handed, so with my right hand, I am holding down the stencil, and then with my left hand, I gently apply the ink. I'm using a light hand. It might look like I'm using a heavy hand because this is a kind of a dark ink color, so it might look like I'm pressing hard. I'm not pressing hard. I'm using a light hand, and I'm just gently applying the ink onto the paper, making sure that I do not shift my stencil. In some areas, in some cases, I go in circular motion, but in other areas where I feel like I might move the pieces, I just go up and down so that I, again, don't move any parts of the stencil. And I continue blending until I ink blend the entire background. So with a stencil like this, you can either use one color to create a one color background, or you can use different colors and have a beautiful ombre, or, you can go from a light blue to a dark blue. You have options. You don't have to stick to just one color of ink. It also helps to use a sticky mat, a grip mat, whenever ink blending with a stencil like this, because the mat really does help hold the stencil and the paper in place. Okay, with that done, I removed my stencil and you can see that I have that one little mistake on that one flower, but I'm not worried about it because I will cover that up using my sentiment. Now for the leaves, I'm using once again pistachio color. And again, I'm going in a back and forth, not in a circular, but more in an up and down motion direction, applying this color onto the paper. I will come back with a different color over this a little bit later, but to change it up a little bit. But for now, this is the color that we're sticking with. I kind of wanted to have, a darker green and also a different shade of green. So you'll see me use another color on top of this a little later. What I love about this particular design is that we can create beautiful white daisies. So we just color the space around the white petals and we keep the petals white if we start with a white cardstock. I'm once again using yellow, the starfruit ink, to ink blend the flower centers, and this gives us beautiful negative space or blank space white daisies. This is what I really love about this stencil, and this is what I did for the card idea number 1. For this card, however, I wanted to try something different. I wanted to see if I could color the daisies, and you certainly have that option with this stencil set because there is a 4th stencil layer that you can apply, like you see me do here. It is going to mask the rest of the background and only allow you to ink blend the daisies. I first used the pimento ink and a smaller blending brush. I just wanted to add a little bit of blending around the edges of the petals, but I kind of added a little bit too much ink and I didn't quite like that. You can see that I have quite a lot of ink, especially on the bottom daisy, so I wasn't particularly thrilled with that. So I reapply the stencil and I decided to do something different. So here I have yellow ink, the starfruit once again, and I'm going to add a ton of yellow to this background. I'm actually going to go back and fix the flower centers. They're not going to be yellow on this card. So I'm applying a bunch of yellow onto the daisies. I'm making them really warm and saturated. And with the yellow done, I'm coming to pimento and I'm applying that to the bottom part of the daisy. So I'm going to have a bit of a gradient to each flower. So the flower is going to be warm yellow at the top and then go into orange, dark orange at the bottom. I'm also coming in with the Brickyard and using a smaller blending brush. These are blending brushes by Simon Says Stamp. And I'm applying this darker red to the very bottom section of my daisies. So you have options. You can also ink blend the daisies. You can do, again, ombre, gradient, shading, lots of things with this stencil set. Now we also need to work on the centers for our flowers. And here I have the center stencil layer and I'm ink blending the centers using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, but I'm using a light hand. And instead of making these black, I'm actually turning these into warm brown flower centers. So I have a lot of bit of yellow there, a lot of bit of warmth. And by applying black with a light hand, I should say, I'm turning that into a warm, dark brown. Next, I decided I needed to fix the leaves and the stems because they didn't really look good here. I wanted to have a darker green, a different shade of green. So I decided I would add blue over the existing green ink blending, and I came in with a lakefront ink and I applied this toward the top section of the leaves and the stems, leaving the bottom section as is, ink blended with pistachio. And that gave me a totally different shade of green, which I really, really like. So if you have a limited color palette, if you have a limited number of inks, don't think that you can't ink blend something. In fact, try layering different colors, different shades and different colors of ink together to have new colors. that's always fun to try. Okay, for this card, I once again wanted to add splatter, but I didn't want to add any splatter onto the actual daisies. On the other card, the daisies were white, so it didn't really matter if I added splatter over them or not because it's pretty much invisible. Here, I wanted to preserve the flowers. I didn't want to have any splatter, any white droplets on the flowers. So I used the stencil layer that I used to inland the background. I positioned it over my flowers, over the stems, over the flower centers, and that created a mask which allowed me to add splatter just to the background of my card. Love this trick. And once again, I'm using the Spellbinders Splatter White product and my water brush to add it onto the background. I removed the stencil and voila! Doesn't that look gorgeous? Love it. For this card, I did not trim the background. I added it onto an A2 tough holding card base as is. I added "You're So Special to Me" sentiment, and I also added some aura sequence. I added some stamping to the inside of my card using a sentiment stamp from the Say Mothers and Fathers stamp from Kristina Werner, and I love the way these cards turned out. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed my experiments with Kristina's Daisy Bouquet Stencils, and I hope you'll give these ideas a try. All supplies I used for these projects are linked and listed in the video description below. I have photos of these cards over on my blog if you want to check them out. Maybe pin them, save them to your Pinterest board so you can refer to them later. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.